This is going to be a quick demonstration of using the debugger, specifically to watch the parsing of an XML file. You'll need that for the work that follows the challenge task, and you've already used it to parse through that company XML file. So that's what I'm going to use as a demonstration. I'm going to show you quickly how to use Firefox, and then I'm going to use Chrome. I fluctuate in my affiliation. Sometimes I prefer Firefox, sometimes I prefer Chrome. So in Firefox, there's two ways. I've just right mouse clicked. There's two ways we can go into Inspect Element or Inspect Element with Firebug. They all do the same thing, they just give us a slightly different interface. I almost never use Inspect Element, I use Inspect Element with Firebug. But actually I've just noticed something useful about this, because I've noticed an error in my code, and that's always useful. So I've just chosen Inspect Element. We've got the same sort of tabs across the top that we always have, and there are three tabs that are useful to you. One, the console, where all error messages appear. The debugger, where if you click on, see code, and you can click in the margin and set a breakpoint, which I'll do on that bit of code. And network is also useful, except that, as it says, we have to reload the page, so just reload the page. Now, the reason the network tab is useful is because we can see that it's managed to find the files and loaded them. If it couldn't find files that we've included a link to in our source, you'll get an error message there saying 404 not found, and that in itself can be really useful, because sometimes code doesn't work simply because it couldn't find the external file because you named it differently, or you've not put it in a script subdirectory, but yet in your source code. That's a common error. So for instance in here I've said that my get request will be in a subdirectory called scripts, and indeed I don't lie. Look, that's my folder there, and here's the index.html, and inside which I've got a folder called scripts. If you haven't done that, then obviously it won't find that file, so you get an error, which is really quite useful to see. Now, I'd not used this, so I was just using it as a test, and I'd noticed that when I did something, I think it was in the console, I click on Get Data, and it says reference error, assignment to undeclared variable return value in get request on line 34. So if I go and look at get request, and on line 34, indeed, look, and this is on the teacher material, so I need to put this right. Response, the HTTP request response XML and the HTTP request response text is assigned something called return value, and nowhere do I remember to put a variable for that, so I better do that now. So I'm going to change my code, so return value is declared as a variable. There, so this is my list of variables, and as a consequence I won't get that same error. So if I just save that, go back to here, reload the page, click on Get Data, and now it's gone to the debugger, but there's no error here. That's the debugger in Firefox. I'm going to switch to using Chrome, and again, right mouse click, Inspect Element. Looks slightly different, but it's got exactly the same sort of interface elements. It'll have a console, a network, and what is debugger in the other ones is called sources. And if you click on that little arrow there, you can see all of the files. So my index.html file, and more importantly, the get request and the display XML. Well, I'm just wanting to talk about parsing the XML, so I'm going to click there and set a breakpoint, and we can see what we can see. Right, now you've already been given the code that goes through company. Where has that gone? So that's what the XML looked like. It was company with employees with attributes. Now, I've explained that we don't normally use attributes, but that's the code I gave you for the demo. And for the challenge task that is below this link, it's changed that company, which uses attributes, to this, which uses elements. So company, and then there's an entity in a way called employee, Instead of these being attributes, they're sub-entities. This is quite a useful view of that. Inside company we've got multiple employees, and each employee has got also multiple properties: ID, gender, age. So that's what we've got to parse. Now, how to parse that? Really the secret lies in the debugger. So I think the first thing I'll do is I'll change the code here to not get request company, but get request company to. So it's going to load that alternative XML file. I'm not going to change the display function because it's not going to work, but I want to use the debugger to find out how to make it work. So now I'll go back to Chrome, I'll reload the page, and I'm going to click on get data. So what it's going to do is go and get company 2 and return that into this function as data. So here we are, data is a document. Now if we look inside data, because data was the parameter, so it contains the object. If we look inside data, it's this stuff that's going to be a guide to you to figure out how to parse the information. And notice there's something in there called document element that equals that company node. In other words, it equals this entire object here, company. Okay, so the first line of my code still is valid. We're going to store into a variable called company the thing called document element, which is all of that company. So I'll step forward in the debugger by clicking on that. By the way, if there were a function here, step over executes the function but doesn't go into it. Step into actually goes into the function. So there's no function, so I could press either and it will work just the same. So now I've got a variable called company. Okay, so what do I need to do? Well, let's kind of have a plan of what I think I'm going to do. If I've got company, what I'm going to do is loop through all of the employees. How do I find out how many employees there are? Well, let's have a look down. It's got children. So it's got childNodes. So childNodes is just at the top of my list here. So let's look at what childNodes I've got. I'm expecting to see that I've got four employees. However, it says childNodes 9. So there are more childNodes than I think. And this is a useful thing to notice, look, that for every actual childNodes, there's a text childNode. So what does that equal? Well, apparently, look, all it equals, its data or its node value, is just the carriage return at the end of the line. So in other words, each one of these has got a return at the end to take it onto a new line, and that forms actually a new node. And we're not interested in those. So is there something about those that we could make them filter out? Well, one thing we notice about text nodes is they don't have any child nodes. So this method that I used before, where we said has child nodes, is quite useful because text nodes don't have children. There's another thing that's quite useful, the node type. All of the text nodes are node type 1, whereas all of the actual employees are node type 1, not 3. Okay, so if we're trying to filter out the things that are actually nodes, we can either use hasChildNodes, the method that you used before, or we could have said childNodes n dot node type equals 1, and that would have worked just as well. So let's see how we get on. So what this is doing is finding out how many child nodes there are and storing it into n elements. I should probably rename that for this version to be n employees, because that's how many employees there are. But nonetheless, that code works. It will tell us n elements, so n elements equals 9 in the debugger. So now we're going to loop through those using a for loop. In other words, the quite normal way of doing things. And then we're doing this test that if the current node that we're looking at has child nodes, then we'll go into it. But that, as I say, that test could equally be if company dot child node square brackets n dot node type equals 1, then we know it's an actual element. So we go into that. First is a text node, so because n is 0, and we know that childNodes 0 is text. So it won't go into line 7, it'll just jump back around the loop. I can't stress enough that when you're using the debugger, don't just click and press, understand what each line does. Try and predict where it'll go next. So it comes back around the loop to the top, now it increments n, so n will equal 1, and now we're looking at childNodes 1. Well, childNodes 1 is an employee, so it'll go to line 7. So in we come to line 7, and we extract childNodes 1 into a variable called employee, just so it's easy to deal with, and then we can refer to employee dot something or other instead of company dot childNodes n. Just makes it a bit easier to read. So we do that, and now we've got employee. So let's go and look at employee. Actually, instead of having to scroll down here and find stuff, there's a really useful thing called watch expressions, where if I click on this plus next to watch expressions, I can type in employee. In fact, it knows that it's there and it suggests it, so I'm just pressing the right arrow to get to the end of that suggestion, hitting enter. And now it's going to show me employees without me having to kind of navigate down all the local variables to find it. Actually, it wasn't much navigating, it was there, but you can see how that can be quite useful. So we can see that employee has also got childNodes. It's got text, and then ID, and then text, and then gender. So what we're going to have to do really is have another loop that loops through these childNodes. So I'm going to need to modify this code. So instead of one loop that just loops through the employees, if the childNodes n has childNodes, or if childNodes n dot node type equals 1, install the employee, and now I'm going to need another loop to loop around, exactly like I've done here, but loop around these childNodes to display them. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that, I'm just explaining how the debugger's shown me that that's what I need to do. Now when I'm looping around, one of the things I'm going to need to do is to extract the value of that thing. So it's probably worth doing a bit of exploring to find out what it is you might need to display. Well, node name's useful, because that tells us what the thing is, that it's the ID, or it's the gender, or it's the whatever else attributes I've got. Whatever else attributes did I have? I had ID, gender, age, and name. So all of those will be stored in the node name. The node value, no, it's not node value, it's something weird. It's something like first child node value. I mean, who'd have thunk it? There's no, without the debugger, there's no way you could have guessed that. So in order to get to the value of something, you end up having to go to the child node first child node value, whereas you can get what the name of it is just from whatever node you're on. What's it called? Node name. So the debugger, I can't stress enough, the debugger is the kind of answer to everything. Hope that's vaguely useful, but really the answer is study and use the debugger and explore and figure out and write pseudocode and solve the problem, I guess. Good luck with it all.